Hello, and welcome to our episode on debunking cultural and stigma myths. Hello, everyone. There we are. Now we're on camera. And we're debunking cultural and stigma myths and how these myths affect mental health. I'm your host, Dr. James Simmons, board certified nurse practitioner and founder and host of Ask the NP. All right, a little bit of legalese we got to get out of the way before we get started, okay? So, if you have any questions regarding medical conditions or treatment plans, let me remind you, this video is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. As always, please seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Okay, that's the stuff we have to say in the beginning, but this is the stuff that's super fun. We get started right now with Anna Wen, a licensed marriage and family therapist for the Behavioral Health and Primary Care Integration Program for Providence St. Joseph Mission Heritage Medical Group. Anna, that is a lot. that's a mouthful. So tell everybody watching who doesn't know about your work, what you do with Providence.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I think this is such an important topic to talk about. It comes up all the time in my work, and I'm a program manager for behavioral health and primary care integration. What that means is we have a team of therapists, and they are experts at what they do. They are placed in primary care settings where we can provide behavioral health services a lot sooner, a lot faster than if a patient were to try to go out in the community, get on a wait list somewhere. Sometimes it can take a month or two. So we try to really provide services in the meantime as they get connected. It's been fantastic work that we've all been doing, and it's such a huge stride towards mental well-being.
A massive stride towards mental and mental well-being, because having that opportunity in the primary care environment like that, rather than having to go through that system that you just explained, which can be such a barrier to folks. I know that just in general, there's a lot of stigma around mental health. So before we even dive into sort of the cultural specific ones, specific myths, what just in general, like the audience is yours, Anna, you have the next half an hour. Like, what do you want to tell people to help break down some of those myths and that stigma of mental health in general?
I can't even begin to tell you, there are so many things that we don't even really think about that we have an opinion of. It's really the unconscious bias, right? It's really how we absorb all of that information from the moment we're born to the moment we are existing right now. I think a lot of what we know about mental health, the way it gets portrayed in media, the way it's talked about in different cultures and different families, a lot of times what we've seen that can really get in the way is, I'll give you an example to start, is it's really difficult for men to seek mental health services. You know, in the society, especially in America, there is this huge masculinity pride where I don't talk about my emotions, I don't experience my emotions, but really, because we're all human, it's the opposite.
Right.
What we know about emotions, if we don't talk about it, if we don't process it, 100% it will come out sideways. And what we've really seen is not just men, but, certain cultures, certain beliefs, the belief that therapy it makes me weak. If I need therapy, it means I've failed and I can't handle my own emotions. The reality is, if you are going to your doctor for, let's say, to treat your broken leg and you need a cast, it's perfectly okay to go to a therapist just to get some guidance on what to do with your emotions, how to process it, how to learn skills and tools for it. A big part of what I've noticed, especially with the stigma for just mental health in general, is because we can't see it on the outside, like with the broken leg, we know how long it's going to heal. On the inside, it's longer. On the inside, it takes a lot of work. It's uncomfortable. So the stigma really kind of comes from within, from not being able to see it and not being able to know exactly when will I get better. I think the unpredictability part makes it really scary.
I love that point, because you're right. We can look at a leg, right? And be like, all right, it's broken. The orthopedist said it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks after surgery. And I can physically see it. I can physically see it healing. Versus what's kind of going on inside of us. And, that's inside of us is, that internal thing that you talked about, but also there are often external forces, particularly those of us who identify as whatever sort of, my dad is black, my mom is white. I generally identify as a black man. most of America, greater than 50% of America, is some sort of non-white individual. And so we all have our own unique sort of cultural external forces on us, particularly when it comes to mental health. And so I'm literally giving you like the 100,000-foot question here, and it's a big one. But how do we sort of identify those myths and stigmas within our own cultures to start to break them down?
I think even before we talk about the culture piece, I think it's really important to know that even though we're talking about cultures, and we can talk about specific cultures, the general part of it, but it's pretty much impossible to talk about culture without generalizing in some way, shape, or form. So what is really important to take away is, even though we're talking about culture, I really want to address that within cultures, there are subcultures. Even you can have two people from the same culture growing up in the same neighborhood with very similar experiences, have two different ideas of what the culture could be. If there's anything I really kind of want to talk about today with the culture, is that it's really not as black and white, and it's really such in this gray area. So as we bring it back to mental health and mental well-being, it's so individualized to each person's experience of what they perceive mental health services to be, what they perceive mental well-being, what they perceive therapy to look like. What would it be like to talk about it? Because in some families, and this could be regardless of culture and because of culture, is that it could be really difficult to talk about some of these things. In some families, it's really, the individual is not as strong or prominent, and it's really more about the family dynamic. And so to seek out individual therapy can sometimes feel like it may go against the family culture, whatever culture that may be.
Very, very interesting. And I guess that's a perspective that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, because it might not be something that is a part of their culture, right? Some cultures value sort of this rugged individualism, that a lot of, can be sort of a very like American sort of thing for people to have, versus, your culture that more respects the family and respects the greater good. So why do you think some of these myths, if we drill down a little bit, we sort of have this dichotomy of understanding that talking about mental health openly is really important and it's a part of our overall well-being, but then we also have these sort of the stigma of it within our own individual cultures? Where do we start to make those ties to respect the culture while also still taking care of our mental health? Like, where does that begin?
I think it's definitely a balance. I can tell you, a big part of what gets in the way for so many people is the unknown. I always say when it comes to anxiety, when we feel anxious or nervous or scared about anything, it's always our fears combined with lack of control and unpredictability. And I truly believe the barriers of seeking out mental health services is because of those three components. If you don't know what it is, if you don't know what it looks like, if you don't know what to expect, it's really scary. And the way we balance it between culture and mental health is we think about what our experience is and who we are and our identity. Our culture and our identity, those two things are very much tied together. I think for each individual person, it's really important to do insightful work to really think about and reflect on who am I as a person? Who am I as a member of my family? And what do I feel comfortable with? And what do I not feel comfortable with? If I don't feel comfortable with it, I wonder why. It's always important to explore. It may not be a good or bad reason. It's really just more of an insightful reflection. I wonder why. I wonder where this came from. Is it because in my family, we don't talk about emotions, and so I'm not used to talking about emotions. And therefore, the idea of going to a therapist to have an hour-long conversation about emotions is terrifying.
Sure.
So it always stems back to something for each individual. I really encourage everyone to think about, where does it stem back for you?
And it's hard because when you do that work, where does it stem back for you? Sometimes it does land on how I was raised, not only my family dynamic, but my cultural dynamic. And so it's hard to sometimes balance like respect for my culture, but then also not blaming, right? Like also being like, this is just how I was raised. I'm not going to place a judgment on it, but I also know that there's some work that I need to do. And, what are some of these kind of easy tips, I guess, if you will? We'll start off a little bit simpler in that, like, conversation starters people can use to start to talk to their families in like a culturally sensitive way, and particularly let the family know like, hey, I need some help with my mental health. I'm going to start this journey, even though it might be sort of culturally accepted in kind of a different way.
I can tell you a majority of the time, there's so much fear with families. And when the conversation is had, what it really comes down to is if we can be brave enough and courageous enough to be vulnerable with our families, to let them know what's really going on and to let them know what we're really thinking, it really helps. And I'll give you an example. I think it's different to have a conversation to say, I'm struggling with A, B, and C, therefore I need therapy. It's very clear cut. However, it doesn't provide a lot of consideration for the family, what they may be thinking. But if we were to approach it from a different viewpoint, to be more vulnerable, to say, I'm having a really hard time, and I was really scared to talk to you about this because I'm afraid that you're going to feel disappointed in me. I'm afraid you might feel like you did something wrong or I did something wrong. But I just want to let you know I'm having a really hard time, and I think I might need help. And so when we come about it with vulnerability, with people we trust and people who we know really love us, it really helps them understand our fears, where we're coming from. And if it's people you trust, they're not going to shame you, they're not going to judge you. People who really love you just want you to feel better. And they just want you to get connected with anyone who can help.
You mentioned the word vulnerable, and I think that's such a scary place for us to be in, particularly with our families, right? Particularly with loved ones and ones that we're really close to. Sometimes this is a little bit of a cliche, but sometimes it's easier to be vulnerable with someone that you don't know, right? And so you might have already been able to wrap your arms around that concept, like, let me be vulnerable with someone that I don't know, like a counselor. But to be vulnerable with your family, that's really, really hard. But I love how you positioned it around, like, you as a family unit, as people that I love and care and trust, however you define family. I need help, and I need your help.
Yeah, and I would say I would use the word family loosely as well, because family could be just basically anyone you trust, anyone who you know loves you unconditionally, anyone who you love unconditionally. I use family loosely because I know we can't always choose our families, and sometimes there are dynamics where it's harder to tell one person than the other. But if there's a safe person that you have, and you have that really like connected relationship with, that's a good person to tell. It doesn't have to be your immediate family. It could be an extended family member. It could be a friend. I use the word family because I think family really describes just that connectedness and love that people share amongst each other. But there's also so many different types of family that branch out as well. So it's not just our immediate family, especially if you don't have a good relationship with your immediate family, you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. But choose someone in your life that you feel really comfortable with.
Yeah. I really love that. Thank you for that, because you're right. There are so many different individuals who, within their family structures, that family is defined in so many different ways, right? Particularly, I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and a lot of us have had to sort of live our lives defining family in a particular way that might be, different from what people consider typical. So thank you for defining that. Now, I want to give you a chance, by the way, while we're here, like, what are some of the most common myths, like just most common, maybe even if they're a little bit crazy and wild, like the most common myths you hear about like cultural groups or different individual racial ethnic groups and mental health? Like, now we got 15 minutes left. Like, let's bust some of those down.
Sounds good. I will tell you, and again, if we're talking in terms of generalities, I really encourage, if you're talking to anyone of a different culture, get to know them, get to know what their experience is. I've heard so many different myths, and so many different cultures have so many different fears tied to it. Like I can tell you, in terms of, I'm Asian American, so I can tell you a big part of it too is a myth is that emotions don't necessarily exist. And a common instance that happens all the time is we'll get someone in who is experiencing physical symptoms, nausea, dizziness, stomach issues, gastrointestinal issues. They go to their doctor, and their doctor says, you're fine. And they can't figure out what's going on. So the doctor says, how about you see this person, a therapist? And sometimes they show up and they're like, I don't know what's going on. I'm experiencing all these physical symptoms. And then we talk about the idea of anxiety. And it's a hard connection to make because sometimes, especially in different cultures, Asian American cultures, of course, but if you're not talking about emotions and you're feeling the emotions because you're human, we're trying to make sense of it. And that's one of the common myths. Another myth about therapy in general, and I think this scares off some of the other cultures too, is talking about personal secrets that are meant to be within the family. That's a big barrier. And there's fear that those secrets will somehow get leaked out.
Like from the individual sharing a secret in a private counseling scenario, but there's fear from that individual that even if I tell this person who might not know my family, or however we define family, might not know my inner circle that I'm about to talk about, but that there's some fear that that'll get out.
Yes, there's fear that that person will tell somebody else, and then it's no longer a secret because it's really the business of the family. But with therapists, we're legally obligated to keep confidentiality. So whatever is talked about, it's completely private. I think
Hold on, Anna. I want you to say that one more time. I feel like that's something really good for people to hear. I want you to say that one more time.
So therapists are legally bound to confidentiality. And what that means is whatever you talk about in that session and future sessions, it's completely private. It would be illegal unless, there are a couple of exceptions, like to keep everyone safe. But for the most part, it's completely confidential. And it eases so many nerves when we just talk about that it's truly this time for you to come and talk about anything you want. There's no judgment. That's actually the other myth, is that therapy is someone with a notepad scribbling, judging you. It's actually, the idea is there's no judgment at all. We're here completely for you, and we're here for whatever it is that you need. It's interesting as we're talking about culture too, because in some cultures, James, the idea of talking about emotions or bad experiences makes you a negative person. So a lot of times there's hesitancy in going to therapy because we don't want to talk about the negative things all the time. That means I'm a bad person if I talk about the negative things.
Or even that those negative things will sort of influence my trajectory in life, will influence the things that happen to me in life. If you're sort of hyper focusing on that all the time. I very much appreciate that. And I want to sort of kind of pivot just a little tiny bit about that relationship we were just sort of talking about the individual who is in the room with you, a counselor, if you will, and yourself, who might share different experiences, might share different cultures. Can you talk a little bit about, is that still a fulfilling and meaningful and helpful counseling relationship, or should people seek out people who have their own shared experience, their own shared cultural experience, or is it individual? Explain a little bit for us.
Do you mean if the client and therapist share the same culture, if that's helpful?
Share the same culture, if that's helpful, or if they're different, and does that really impact the relationship?
I really do believe, and I think it depends on everyone's comfort level. For different patients and different clients, there's this kind of understanding that if someone is the same culture as me, they understand where I'm coming from. So when I share my values and beliefs, it doesn't sound crazy. And it doesn't sound odd because they know exactly what it's like. They know where I'm coming from. I would always encourage, I think it depends on if you are needing mental health therapy, and whatever's going to get you in the door is going to be helpful. But I would also encourage us to think outside the box, that the therapist and client, they don't have to share the same culture, the same ethnicity for one person to truly want to be there for another human being. And I think in many ways, we are very comfortable with being comfortable. I think it's also really good for us to branch out, to have these different experiences with feeling uncomfortable, but having good outcome. So if it's a therapist and client who share completely different ethnicities, cultural beliefs, but they come together to have a really meaningful moment, I think what that does is it really shows the person and every single person there that we can have good experiences with people who look different than us, who sound different from us. We can still feel understood from someone who doesn't share the same ethnicity or cultural beliefs. I think On
Mm,
a grander scale, James, I think that's so much of what it's about, that we have to get comfortable with feeling and connected with someone who's different than us, who may appear
mm.
that way. I think we're similar in more ways than we think, but I think the challenge is on a grander scale is for all of us to get more comfortable with people who we think we might feel uncomfortable with.
Mm. I feel like you took us in a huge direction, Anna, that I totally want to go down. It's kind of amazing, right? Like that really is sort of the crux of everything that's going on in the world right now. And I'm going to tie it back to mental health a little bit, because I think the state of the world, sort of regardless of where you land politically or ideologically, the world feels like a really icky, weird place right now. And we're not meeting each other where we are. We're not being comfortable, being uncomfortable around someone who has a different culture, right? And our anxiety levels are high all the time because of it. So how can we sort of take a step back from that and realize this constantly operating at a 4 or 5 out of 10 of anxiety is actually not good for me? And here are the steps I need to take to sort of kind of combat that because of the state of the world right now.
I think the reality is, and you're so right, I think, to be honest, everything is interconnected, because when we think about mental well-being, we think about how we're feeling in this state right now, and is it a reflection of everything that's been going on? I think you bring up a really good topic and question too, as we start to talk about a little more of how do we find that balance, because we want to be able to, yes, honor ourselves, but we also want to be able to get into a place where we are growing. I think that's what it's really all about. And it ties back to mental health, is that we want to grow. And that's really why people come, and people want to be in the sessions, because they want to learn ways to grow and do things differently. I always say, if you're doing something that's the same and it works for you, by all means, that's okay. If you want to continue that and there's nothing wrong with it, then there's nothing wrong with it. But if you would like to just step outside your comfort zone and start to grow and start to experience new things, interact with different people, and have different types of experiences, I think then that's really what we're talking about, that ties to everything, whether it's mental health, and whether it's getting to know someone from a different culture, whether it's getting to know someone that looks different from us, whether it's really kind of wanting to talk about different ideas and disagree. I think it all ties back. It's all interconnected together. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's all interconnected in that way.
It does. It's absolutely interconnected. And yes, it does. I mean, I kind of threw a lot at you with that question. So, but I just appreciate that. I feel like we're in this weird place of everyone's mental health is really, really struggling right now, just because of so many things going on in the world. And while, we've seen sort of progress towards acceptance of treating mental health as on equal par, I guess, if this is the right way to say this, with physical health, like I really need to take care of my mental health. The National Council for Mental Well-Being says that progress is not happening nearly as fast in communities of color, just period, full stop, compared to white communities. Why do you think that is, and how do we sort of fix that?
Well, I think just over the course of history, without getting into it, I think there's just been a lot of mistrust, not just history, but current climate and current events.
And you
You
can
know,
get into it, Anna. I mean, we only have 6 minutes left, but I am ready to go there. So get into it if you want to.
but to be honest, there's mistrust because there have been events that have created that mistrust. And I think to ignore the mistrust is a mistake. I think it has to be addressed. I think it has to be acknowledged, and I think it has to be worked through and mended. I think the idea is there's so much in history and current events that have created this mistrust that there needs to be change. I think there's a lot of opinions on what that change could look like, or if there should be change, but I think there needs to be some sort of change nonetheless. I think it's harder on communities of color because if you don't trust, how would you trust your providers? How would you trust your therapist? If trust is kind of the basic thing, I think that really links a community to really good care. And I think what that means is if we work on building that trust, if we work on mending the trust, if we work on acknowledging what didn't work, how it can work going forward, I think it would help. I don't think it would fix it, but I think it would help in terms of encourage more people to seek more services, to get healthier, to go to your provider, to go to your therapist. I think when trust is there, it's so foundational. When we think about psychology, And how we develop as babies, as children, the foundation of it is trust. We need to know that we're safe. If we don't feel safe in our community, if we don't feel safe in the current climate of everything that's going on, we don't have our basic needs met. And it's going to be really hard to do a lot of the deeper work without our basic needs in the first place.
Sure. And how do I love this concept of safety, and if we just don't feel safe and protected, we can't do any of the deeper work. And I kind of want to go back to that sort of individual patient client relationship or patient provider relationship in terms of safety. How, as providers, those that are watching, what are some of the steps and tips and tricks that they can do if they have a patient or a client who shares a different cultural background than they do, in sort of respecting that cultural background and trying to learn to understand it, while also not letting those differences be a barrier in the progress for the patient?
I would say it's tough, because I'm going to throw out tricks and tips, because I want to say the best approach you can take is for anyone, not just a provider, is for anyone, is just pause and approach this person like a human being. And I know it sounds so simple, but when you approach someone like a human being and you have no idea who they are, be curious, ask questions, get to know who they are, get to know their fears, their concerns, what brings them joy. If we approach this person like a human being, we're really sending the message that I see you as a person. I see you as a human being. I don't see you as anything else, but I'm wanting to get to know you. I'm wanting to just really get to know who you are. And if you have any fears, I'd love to hear it. If you have anything that you want to share with me, I'd love to hear it. The hardest part about that is it takes a lot of time and patience. And if we can allow ourselves the time and patience to get to know someone truly who looks different than us, who talks differently than us, who, even if it's someone who we think looks the same, I would still argue that's still a different person with different experiences. Just as another human being, from one to another, take the time, take the patience, get to know someone. That's the best way around it. That's the best way to truly get to know a person inside and out.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Approach them like the human being that they are, right?
Yeah.
We have that shared experience. So we quite literally have like 73 seconds left, right? Something like that. The floor is yours, Anna. This is like my favorite part when we do these. The floor is yours. Like, anything else that you think is really important for the audience to hear about breaking down these cultural stigmas and myths around mental health. And I know we were kind of speaking in generalities. Feel free to get specific too, like wherever you want to take this, the floor is yours, because I think so often people don't have the opportunity to really respect and appreciate how difficult those struggles can be. And I really want them to hear it from you in the time we have remaining.
I'll leave it with this, James. I know there's this golden rule that's been around for ages, and it's treat others the way you want to be treated. And I'd really like to change that to treat others the way they want to be treated. And the way you do that is to take the time to ask, to take the time to get to know someone, and to take the time to have that human interaction and connection. I really think it would, if we're treating others the way we want to be treated, it's really about us and our perception. But take the time to get to know the other person and how they would like to be treated. I think that's what I would change the golden rule to.
Oh, I love that. Say it one more time. The headline of the golden rule. Give us your new golden rule one more time.
So treat others the way they want to be treated.
Oh, Anna Nguyen, I love that so much. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Anna Nguyen, everybody that you're looking at, licensed marriage and family therapist for the, ready, it's a mouthful, for the Behavioral Health and Primary Care Integration Program for Providence St. Joseph Mission Heritage Medical Group. Anna, this was awesome.
Fun.
It was super fun. I could keep going for like an hour, but we do have to get out of here. So thank you, Anna, for being here. And thank you to everyone for listening and sending in your questions. If you're looking for medical advice, of course, please visit providence.org. And this part's important. Make sure to follow Providence on social media at Providence on Twitter, under Providence Health System on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Have a fantastic afternoon.